The world's two largest economies are once again on a collision course. The China-US trade war has reignited, but this time, the stakes are higher than ever before. Tensions are high, tariffs have dropped, and the entire global economy is feeling the shockwaves. But what does this mean for everyday Americans? For businesses? And for the future of global trade? This is a battle that could change the world as we know it. In one corner, you have China, an economic powerhouse with strategies that stretch across continents. In the other, President Trump, whose tough stance on China had already rocked the global order before. Their last clash saw record tariffs, trade deals, and diplomatic firestorms. Now, with both sides getting into it more aggressive, we're entering a dangerous new chapter. Why is this trade war heating up again? What's driving this new conflict, and who will come out on top? From economic manipulation to shifting global alliances, the impact of this battle could redefine the future. But how did we get here? What triggered this new chapter in the trade war? Let's take a closer look at the roots of this escalating conflict. The trade war between China and the United States, which had been on pause for 4 years, is now back in full force. The stakes are even higher this time, with both sides preparing for an intense economic clash that could reshape global trade. The previous trade war, which began under President Trump's first administration, resulted in a series of tariffs, retaliations, and negotiations. Trump imposed significant tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods, aiming to reduce the trade deficit and address what he called unfair trade practices. In response, China levied its own tariffs on American products, retaliating with economic strategies that disrupted global markets. Amid the back and forth, both sides eventually signed the Phase 1 trade deal in early 2020, which resulted in China agreeing to purchase more U.S. goods and make certain structural changes in its economy. However, the deal was far from a permanent solution to the underlying issues. While it provided temporary relief, the core disputes, such as intellectual property theft, forced technology transfers, and the growing imbalance of trade, remained unresolved. Now, with new tariffs that have dropped, the conflict is reigniting with renewed intensity. So, what's driving this sudden escalation? The answer lies in several factors that have reignited the tensions between these two global giants. For one, the world's economies are still reeling from the aftershocks of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has exposed vulnerabilities in global supply chains. China's economic recovery, bolstered by its aggressive industrial strategies, has only deepened U.S. concerns. The shift in global power dynamics has made China a more assertive player in the international arena, and Trump's America First policies seem to be rallying back into play, aiming to safeguard American interests against what some see as China's rising dominance. A significant shift in the U.S. administration's approach to China has also played a role in reigniting tensions. Under President Biden, there was no major rollback of Trump-era tariffs, with his administration focusing on balancing economic recovery while addressing competition with China. Biden had emphasized that his focus was on rebuilding the U.S. economy and countering China's growing influence, particularly in the realm of technology and global infrastructure. Policies designed to protect American jobs and industries from Chinese competition kept the pressure on, and the rhetoric remained hard-hitting, especially regarding China's aggressive actions in regions like Hong Kong and Taiwan. China, for its part, has made it clear that it won't back down. The country is doubling down on its strategy of economic self-sufficiency, aiming to reduce its reliance on foreign markets and technologies. This includes accelerating advancements in technology, particularly in semiconductors, AI, and clean energy, and pushing for greater regional influence through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative. China's countermeasures against U.S. tariffs have intensified this time, with moves to devalue its currency, shift its trade policies, and seek new economic partnerships to mitigate the effects of the U.S.'s trade stance. As the U.S. and China dig in their heels, the global community watches closely. The world's largest economies are on a collision course, and the results of this renewed trade war will have lasting impacts on global markets. Trade routes, supply chains, and geopolitical alliances are all on the line. This is more than just a clash of economies. It's a battle for global influence and dominance. The stakes have never been higher, and the consequences could be far-reaching. But what does this all mean for global markets? How are other countries responding to this heightened conflict? The world's economies are already starting to feel the tremors. The next chapter will show just how deep the ripples of this trade war are felt across the globe. When two giants collide, everyone feels the impact. The trade war between China and the United States isn't just about tariffs. It's a global event that reverberates far beyond these two superpowers. Countries dependent on both the US and China for trade are struggling to navigate the shifting economic landscape. Nations like Japan, South Korea, and Vietnam, which rely heavily on both, are trying to maintain access to key markets without angering either side. With tariffs increasing, global supply chains are disrupted, leaving these countries scrambling to adjust. Industries such as technology, agriculture, and manufacturing are seeing significant effects. The tech industry, reliant on multinational supply chains, is experiencing delays and price hikes. US restrictions on Chinese tech giants like Huawei have caused a ripple effect, forcing companies to find alternatives, which drives up costs. Similarly, American farmers who hoped for better access to China are facing shifting tariffs and changing market demands. Manufacturers, particularly in the auto and electronics sectors, are dealing with rising costs for materials and parts, forcing them to rethink operations. In the US, consumers are beginning to feel the pinch. Tariffs on Chinese goods are pushing up prices on everyday items. With fewer choices and higher costs, American families are feeling the strain. This could backfire politically for Trump, as Americans question whether the trade war is worth the cost. China, however, is showing remarkable resilience. The country's self-sufficiency in tech and manufacturing is helping it weather the storm. By investing heavily in its own semiconductor industry, China is reducing reliance on US tech. China's push into electric vehicles and clean energy is helping it stay competitive globally. Instead of crumbling, China is building alternatives that allow it to stay strong without the US market. Emerging markets in Africa and Southeast Asia are facing both opportunities and challenges. Some countries are benefiting by positioning themselves as alternatives in global supply chains. Nations like Vietnam, India, and Mexico are seeing increased investment as companies look to diversify away from China. However, countries reliant on Chinese investment are at a disadvantage. In Africa, where China has built infrastructure, the economic fallout from the trade war could result in delayed projects and fewer job opportunities. Smaller economies are caught in a delicate balancing act, trying to maintain relationships with both powers. But this isn't just about economics. As tensions rise, the trade war could evolve into a global geopolitical struggle. The question now is how the economic clash will reshape global alliances and power dynamics. The fallout from this war is not just felt in markets and prices but could influence diplomatic conflicts. What happens when economic tensions spill over into global politics? That's the next chapter in this escalating drama. It's more than just trade, it's a battle for the future of global leadership. The China-US rivalry has moved beyond tariffs and trade deals to a larger contest. Which nation will dominate the 21st century? As the two largest economies continue their power struggle, the world is watching to see who will shape the future of global influence. China's growing influence is impossible to ignore. Its Belt and Road Initiative is one of the most ambitious projects in history, aiming to build infrastructure and strengthen economic ties across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Through the BRI, China has invested billions into roads, ports, railways, and energy projects in countries from Pakistan to Kenya. These investments are not just about trade, they're strategic moves to create a global network of dependence on China. This allows China to expand its economic and political reach, challenging the US's long-standing position as the dominant global power. By strengthening ties to emerging markets, China is effectively creating an alternative to the US-led international order. In response, the US is struggling to retain its global influence amid shifting alliances. Russia, once a Cold War adversary, has grown closer to China, collaborating on energy projects and military exercises. Together, they counterbalance the West's influence. In Europe, while the EU has grown wary of China's rise, it remains deeply intertwined with China economically. This presents a challenge for the US, trying to rally its European allies while managing its internal political and economic struggles. Emerging economies in Asia, Africa, and Latin America are navigating the delicate balancing act of maintaining ties with both powers. The tech and innovation arms race is central to this rivalry. Areas like 5G, AI, and quantum computing are becoming critical battlegrounds. China's tech industry, led by Huawei, is a global leader in 5G technology, raising security concerns in the US. The US has worked to block Chinese companies from gaining access to its markets, while doubling down on its own tech innovations to maintain a competitive edge. However, China's rapid progress in these sectors challenges US dominance, and if China outpaces the US in these fields, it could alter the balance of power for decades. The military and diplomatic dimensions of this rivalry are also intensifying. Tensions in the South China Sea, where China has built military bases on disputed islands, have become a flashpoint. The US has committed to defending freedom of navigation in the region, often conducting military operations to challenge China's claims. Taiwan remains a sensitive issue as China considers it a breakaway province and has threatened to use force to bring it under control. The US, in turn, provides military aid to Taiwan, complicating the situation further. These flashpoints could escalate into broader conflicts, with military posturing and diplomatic disputes asserting dominance. As the US and China escalate their rivalry, it's clear that this is more than an economic clash. It's a comprehensive contest for global supremacy. The shifting alliances, economic investments, and strategic moves are part of a larger game, where every decision has far-reaching consequences. The geopolitical landscape is changing, and every action taken by both sides will reverberate across the globe. But what happens when both sides start using economic weapons to fight dirty? As the trade war intensifies, the US and China may resort to even more aggressive tactics, making the global economy's future uncertain. The stakes are higher than ever, and the battle for global leadership is just getting started. Tariffs aren't the only tools in this war. Both China and the United States have a range of economic weapons at their disposal, and they're willing to use them. These tactics aren't just about slapping on tariffs, they're strategic moves that can cause lasting damage to each other's economies and the global system at large. What's at stake here is not just trade, but the balance of power in the global economy, and both sides have dirty tricks up their sleeves. China, for instance, has a number of countermeasures it can use to retaliate. One of the most potent tools in its arsenal is its ability to devalue its currency. By lowering the value of the yuan, China can make its exports cheaper and more competitive on the world stage, countering the impact of tariffs. This is a tactic China has used in the past, and it could significantly undermine US attempts to gain a trade advantage. Another key asset for China is its control over rare earth metals. These materials are critical for a wide range of technologies, from electronics to clean energy, and China controls around 80% of global supply. If China decides to limit or cut off this supply, it could have devastating consequences for industries that depend on these metals, including many in the US. Additionally, China's control over vital trade routes, particularly in the South China Sea, gives it the ability to disrupt global shipping and logistics. With a strategic manipulation of these routes, China can create significant headaches for US and global companies reliant on smooth trade flows. On the US side, Trump's strategy has focused heavily on sanctions and blocking Chinese companies from entering the American market. The US has already targeted major Chinese firms like Huawei, cutting them off from vital technologies and limiting their access to US customers. Sanctions on key Chinese entities or individuals can cause serious disruptions in China's economy, stalling technological progress and causing long-term economic damage. Furthermore, the US has leveraged its network of international allies to apply pressure on China. By rallying countries in Europe, Asia, and beyond to follow suit with trade restrictions, the The US can isolate China on the world stage, even if Beijing continues to challenge US supremacy. In the digital age, cyber warfare has become another tool both sides might wield. As the world becomes more connected through the internet, both China and the US are increasingly capable of launching cyber attacks that can cripple each other's economic infrastructure. Hacking, data theft, and cyber espionage could become the new front lines in this economic battle. Both countries are investing heavily in cyber capabilities, and there are growing concerns about attacks on financial systems, intellectual property, and critical infrastructure. A large-scale cyber assault could not only damage individual companies but could also lead to broader economic instability. The long-term impact of this trade war will likely reshape global supply chains and international trade relations. As tensions escalate, companies will be forced to rethink their supply chains and consider relocating production to countries less dependent on either the US or China. Multilateral trade agreements, already under strain, could suffer further as countries grow more protective of their economic interests. Economic isolationism might rise, with nations retreating from global trade networks in favor of national self-sufficiency. This shift could undermine decades of progress in international cooperation and trade liberalization. But the real question is, can this trade war be stopped before it spirals out of control? The stakes are higher than ever, and both sides are playing a dangerous game. As each country uses its economic weapons to target the other, the future of global stability hangs in the balance. What could happen next? Only time will tell, but the consequences of this escalating conflict could be far-reaching for the entire world. As the trade war between China and the US rages on, its consequences are shaping the future of the global economy and geopolitics. Both sides have entered a battle that could redefine the balance of global power. The question remains, who will come out on top in the end? We've covered the resurgence of the trade war, the economic implications for global markets, and the dirty tricks both China and the US are using to gain the upper hand. The stakes are higher than ever, and the world is watching closely. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends to stay updated on this ever-evolving story. And we want to hear from you. Who do you think is winning the trade war? China or Trump? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.